So this video's concept is interesting because I've got actually an array of topics to talk about. In essence, I'm calling this the Bionicle Talk, where we just have a conversation about interesting Bionicle things. Obviously, today's focus is in part 2008 Bionicle, but that's not entirely what we're talking about, because in terms of topics, I also wanted to cover kit bashing and kit bashing pieces as it relates to Bionicle and its history. On top of that, I wanted to touch on the Matoran gears and the improved masks for the Matoran as well, and I've got a couple of other things, including a mock over here to showcase and a little build that I think you might get some use out of. So if that all sounds interesting to you, then stay tuned, and of course subscribe, it helps. All right, let's go ahead and get right on into it. And the first thing I wanted to go ahead and talk about was kit bashing specifically. One of the main reasons I wanted to talk about this today is because kit bashing is something that Bionicle has done for quite a long time. A long part of its history was made up by cutting up other Lego or previous Bionicle parts and throwing them together to make new things. And I think that that's smart in some ways because it means you're going to have callbacks to other pieces. I only recently learned that, like, the Vaki leg, for example, actually has callbacks in it to the Mata foot, which makes total sense. The Vaki uses the Mata foot, and yet I never noticed it before until someone pointed it out to me, and it's so fascinating that that's the case. So I went out of my way to ask myself, what was the first kit bashed piece from Bionicle, like, that we have actual evidence for? And honestly, I think it's actually the Kraahkan. And I know that sounds super weird because when you look at the mask right off the bat, it doesn't look super kit bashed, but this right here is a prototype sketch. And in fact, the prototype Makuta set, of which I've done a video a few years ago at this point, it's one of my most liked, most viewed videos on the channel, actually uses these two masks glued together, because these masks that you're seeing here are actually the Mata Pakari and the original Vahi. Some people think that it's supposed to be the Nuva Pakari because the Nuva Pakari was also in the prototype parts, but as far as I'm aware, the person that bought the set bought it off of eBay from a seller. I don't know the story behind that, and some other parts were included in that as well. I think that Pakari mask was just included in place of the Mata Pakari. But if you look at the Pakari here, or at least the black mask that's being worn on the head, it is supposed to be worn face up, right? As is the case with Makuta himself, but you can also see that the Mata head back here is turned on its side as well, using the eye stalk, although shaped a little differently here, as the eyes for the front of the model, and obviously viewable from the top as well. This is, in essence, the Pakari, just kind of dolled up, and the Vahi, also dolled up. Now, obviously, the final Kraahkan that we would get still definitely has callbacks to the Pakari, notably where the little, like, holes in the mask are, but it also obviously has calls to the Rakshi, and the shaping of the nose is literally a Rakshi back. And even the strips on the side of the cheek are reminiscent of the Rakshi as well, which also have strips on the side of their cheek, although they don't protrude out from the side. It's also worth noting that the Rakshi, at least there's some evidence that there was some kit bashing going on with those sets as well, notably with the head design. The head we ultimately landed on is a fairly straightforward design, but there's actually some design cues taken from the original Matatu mask, and it makes me wonder if maybe we were supposed to get, like, Rakshi revised versions of the Noble masks with the Rakshis at some point, and then, you know, Lego went out of their way, obviously, to give us the Kraahkan as their sort of collectibles instead. I think that would have been super cool, though, and obviously people have went out of their way to do something like this, creating custom Rakshi heads as well. Moving on to, since we're talking about Makuta here, I also wanted to showcase something I plan to build for the channel, and this is a mock that was posted over on the Discord by a member named Niet Hub. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and I do apologize if I'm not, but the mock, let me go ahead and show you that really quickly, has got to be one of the coolest combination models I have ever seen. It is this right here. This is a combination of three sets: Makuta from 2003, Tahu Mata, and Sidorak. That's it, at least as far as I know. Maybe there's like an extra tube or something thrown in here. Honestly, I don't know, because I know Sidorak has a few tubes in that set as well. I don't know. But this is incredible. looking. The fact that this set came out looking so clean, I don't want to show too much of it off. I don't want to reveal too much of it right this minute because I do plan on making a video about it. But this is incredible. And I love how they were able to block the colors as well because it still feels like Makuta. Like if this had been the Makuta that we saw in, say, 2005, if LEGO had stretched out the timeline a little bit so that we actually saw Makuta in his physical form, you could strap on the Nivok wings if you want to, you can exclude them, whatever the case may be. This could be like his empowered form, whatever. I think this would have been exceptional. Now, obviously, you'd want it to have some kind of functions, in which this does. This is built around the Tahu Mata torso, so it actually has the ability to swing its arms up and down. I don't believe it has any waist swivel, but the fact that it has even that is honestly incredible. And the final result here, the chef's kiss. Like, this is perfect. This is literally perfect in my opinion, and I cannot wait to throw that together because holy shit. But focusing back on 2008 for a minute, I had this thought for a while now about the Matoran. One of the things that I think holds them back is the fact that they're built around those fragile sockets. In a lot of ways, the Matoran are kind of a precursor to CCBS. I know that sounds weird, but bear with me for a moment. The reason I say this is because they're built around a ball joint system, right? Like they don't really have, if any of them have, axles in their sets at all, or pins for that matter. Everything has either axles built into it, like the weapons, the wings, the jetpacks, or just connect via ball joints. And this is kind of actually how the Toa Mata function as well. Like, not exactly, of course. The legs on them have ball joints on the top and the bottom, so it changes out how those function. And of course, the torso itself has a gear function built into it as well, which begs the question, if something like the Matoran torso, like this, had been made, but designed so that instead of having ball joints on all sides, it was more along the lines of this, where it has a gear system, but it's built in. So the reason I say that, it does mean you wouldn't be building the gear system, although I'd perfectly be fine with that, honestly. But what it does mean is that if the gears are built in, that it could potentially reduce the price. I honestly don't know about this, but at the very least, you could get something where the top shoulder ball joints are non-existent. They don't exist as a ball joint, but rather as a pinhole instead. And then they could just have you slot down some gears inside the body. In essence, you could think of it almost like the G2 Bionicle gearbox, but attached to ball joints at the hips. And at the top, you could have like a socket or something. Now, again, I would want it to be the non-fragile socket, right? The 2007 and prior socket design, because that socket was not bad. LEGO just fixed it because they had one bad batch of sockets, and they're like, oh, I guess this thing we've been using for 6+ years now is actually bad. We need to redesign it. Very stupid choice, but whatever. I'm not in charge of that. That said, though, it does make me think that the Matoran at the end of the day would have been received better than if they, well, were what we ended up getting as a whole, right? Because the Matoran don't have functions to them, but in a lot of ways they are like the Toa Mata. It's blasphemous to say it, but they have roughly the same articulation, just lacking the gear function, and they even have posable heads. In my opinion, I think that the Agori are probably the best middle ground between Matoran and something like the Star sets. The Star sets aren't bad by any means, it's just bad that they're characters we had seen before, in almost every way downgraded. That's a neat concept, but they're also not always sets that people were asking for. I think if it would have been like the run of the original Toa Mata sets, but stars, you know, made smaller, people would have received them a little bit better, but I digress. I think that the Matoran have a good balance of color, for one thing, especially bringing back old colors like Mata, blue, orange, things like that, but then also filling out the characters at least a little bit more. They don't do a whole lot to add like armor to the characters. Again, the stars definitely do that. But had we gotten a specific armor piece to cover them, I think all told, they would have been pretty decent sets. And they were a good sort of footing into Bionicle, in my opinion, especially at the price point they came out for. Granted, yeah, we got the little Rocky piece that came with them with their box sets. I'm sure that cost something extra. So if having it my way meant getting rid of those pieces, as much as I do love the display factor of those pieces, I would do it. I would sacrifice those lids for these gear functions, or for something just to make them that little bit better. Before we get into the little game piece thing I wanted to show you, I did want to go ahead and do a direct comparison between masks here, because I have the Mystica Tahu mask here. And like I said, I can see aspects of this mask that remind me of the How. I don't see it as a How in my own mind, but it's a cool looking mask either way. But then you have this version by Rothanak with a couple of mods by myself. This looks a lot more like the How. Honestly, if this had been given to us with Tahu in 2008, I think people would have been pretty happy. Is it perfect? No. Is it like his Toa Nuva form? Not really. I mean, there's a little bit of the bell kind of shaping that the Toa Nuva version of the How has, and I have it handy, so I might as well show it. More alliteration. But you can see that at least the shaping is not exactly the same, but it's a little there. There's a little bit of an extra bulge out to each side where the cheeks appear on the model. And this has that. This has that bell shape, that shape that protrudes out from the sides. I think it would have worked out quite well. The cow that I grabbed from Rothanak's designs is not designed like any of the older cows. Basically, it's just taking design cues from this one right here, and I do like it better because I'm just not a big fan of that mask in general. Having pinholes in the side, although they printed slightly incorrectly, and the model had some issues with it, so I did have to go in there and kind of touch that up. But still, I think this actually looks like a decent cow. Is it perfect? No. It's very sleek. It's kind of got an avant-garde kind of feel to it. It's a nice design. I don't think it's great for Gali specifically, but for a Matoran character, especially with those big beady eyes, because I think that works really well for a Matoran character, this is great. I like it quite a lot. And this model, I believe I have posted over on the Discord as well if you want to use this one specifically. Just note that although I did make it where it was usable with the visor from 2007, it doesn't fit for some reason, and I think when I make the next 3D printable one, I'm just going to remove the axle entirely and add an axle hole there instead, which leads me to my next point. So 2008/2007 were actually kind of weird in their mask design, because the masks, not all of them, but at least some, had axle holes rather than an axle sticking out. This was interesting. In some ways, it makes the masks worse because they're not compatible with the visors at all, but in some ways, it also makes the masks better because you can change the axle length to whatever length you want, so you can use it kind of where you want. And I like this idea. I think it's a good compromise overall. But I think the main reason for this, and I have no way to confirm it, is that it changes one thing about the mask from the exterior, and it's the fact that masks from before this, all masks in fact that have an axle hole on the inside, do not have a mold mark on the front of the mask, or at least it doesn't have that inset. I don't know what else to call it. There's a little divot in each of the axle-based masks where this does not have that. The only mask that gets anywhere close to that is Gali's, with this little circular indentation, and I think that's just because they did need some kind of flat surface for the mold to inject in the first place. I think they could have done it somewhere at the top of the head here because they've got a little bit of a flat area there to attach to, or maybe even the top of the eye, but whatever the case may be, I think it's fine. And overall, I think the mask's design is okay had it been symmetric. I hate this eye. I'm so sorry. I know that there are some people that like it. I really don't like it for Gali especially, but just generally, the holes are kind of off center and just like, what are we doing? I think it actually would have been interesting to use an eye like that for one of our insect Makuta, right? Because insects are known for having those compound eyes, and this is a good way to sort of imitate that, right? To get that compound eye look, because you have all these teeny tiny holes that you see the head through. So if you would have used that with one of these fully transparent heads that came out in 2008, that would actually have been pretty cool, all things considered. Going back over to topics to cover, so generally speaking, I think these Av Matoran masks are probably what I would land on for a fire and a water Av Matoran. And I still think you didn't have to give us them in place of the Makuta Av Matoran. I think you still could have cut it in half like we did and just give us those 3 Matoran masks, one for the Pakari, one for the How, one for the Cow in box sets instead. That would have been a pretty simple solution, and you weren't, you weren't forced down a specific road, if that makes sense, right? Because LEGO gets to design these characters, they get to choose whatever masks they wear. Yes, it does mean adding extra molds, but 2008 has so many molds in the first place that it's kind of obnoxious how many of them really get underutilized, in my opinion. And that's especially true for masks as well. For example, the flight adaptive visor. As many people might love that piece, it's only ever used on 2 masks. One mask fully compatible with it. The other mask is just a repeat of a mask we already had. But, it just so happens that it doesn't have a top, so it works with this piece. And nothing else after the fact was designed around that piece anyway, so that's kind of a waste of a mold, in my opinion. And I really, honestly, it's just me, I don't think Liwa's vehicle adaptive mask is any better for having that visor, but that's just me. All right, touching on the last thing here before we go ahead and end this video, quite simply a spinner. Because someone mentioned how they wish that LEGO would have given, like, what was it, like dice or something along those lines. Essentially, in 2009, Bionicle gave us the life counter. And it's a really cool concept, right? It's a neat piece overall as well. But the idea is that you shoot the Thorn Axe, you play that whole game. Maybe I'll talk about it in its own separate video. But the counter itself is kind of usable because it is one of only a few pieces, honestly, that actually have a sequential number count printed on it. There aren't that many LEGO pieces that have that. And so I decided to go ahead and turn it into, instead of a life counter, a damage counter. And this is what I came up with. Now, it's hard to see because of where the lighting is, but this is free spinning. And you can see currently that it only reveals one number at a time, right? So if I let gravity feed the numbers up and down, you can see that if I spin this just like this around, that I can lay it flat on the ground and it will display whatever number I want. Or if I want to instead attach something to this axle right here, I could spin this from behind, and now the life counter spins, and then when it eventually lands, that's how much damage I deal. 3 damage, right? If it lands on the skull, that's an auto kill or whatever you want it to be, right? So I think that that's a really cool concept. It's a good use out of that piece, and it's very few pieces as well. I'll go ahead and post the build for this over on the Discord, and I recommend you check out that Discord because it is free to join. There are 680 some odd members over there now, including myself. So feel free to join, and of course, if you want to get in contact with me, that's kind of the best place to do it anyway. With that said, though, you can also check out the Instagram and Patreon, both of which are linked down in the description below. And if you appreciate videos like this one, especially these talk videos, because I do enjoy them, let me know that one in the comments, and maybe one of these times I'll get a guest on and we can all have a chat about some Bionicle stuff. With all that being said, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you all in the next Bionicle talk and in the next video. Hope you're having a great day, and stay cool. It's boiling outside. Take care.